You can all stop telling me what I agreed to, because I know what I signed, and that is not my signature. My voice came out sharper than I expected, and for the first time since Arthur died, the room went completely still. I sat at the end of a polished walnut conference table in Stamford, Connecticut, with a 12-page document resting beneath my hands. Across from me, my son Daniel stared down at his coffee. Beside him, Melissa sat perfectly straight, one hand folded over the other as though we were discussing a routine bank statement instead of the disappearance of nearly everything my husband had spent 40 years building. Rebecca Sloan, Arthur's estate attorney, had called the meeting that morning. She had told me only that there was an unexpected transfer issue involving Whitmore Packaging. I had assumed it was another tax problem. Then she slid the document toward me. According to the paper, 6 weeks earlier, I had voluntarily assigned my entire interest in Arthur's company to Daniel. The shares represented millions of dollars, but the number barely registered. What I saw was my name at the bottom. Evelyn Whitmore, written in blue ink. Almost right. Almost mine. Melissa leaned forward. Evelyn, you asked me to prepare it. Her tone was gentle, which somehow made it worse. You said Daniel should handle the company now. I looked at her, then at Daniel. Did I say that to you? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his cup. Mom, you were overwhelmed after Dad passed. There were a lot of papers. That sentence landed harder than an accusation. For months, people had been reminding me what grief could do to memory. I had misplaced my reading glasses twice, forgotten a grocery list, driven 3 miles toward our old church before remembering I was supposed to be meeting Rebecca downtown. Small things, ordinary things, I had told myself. But now everyone at that table seemed to be watching me as though those forgotten moments explained a signature worth $3.4 million. Rebecca said nothing. She simply turned the final page toward the window, letting the pale February light fall across it. That was when I saw the mark. Tiny, faint, written near the lower margin in black ink. A.W-17, my breath caught. Arthur used that handwriting on everything from Christmas storage boxes to insurance folders. The slanted W, the short dash, the 7 with the little crossbar. I had seen it thousands of times. Where did this come from? I asked. Melissa glanced down. Probably something copied from an older file. But I was no longer listening to her. Arthur had been gone for months. According to the document header, this assignment had been created only 6 weeks ago. I touched the letters with one finger. The ink looked different from the signature beside it. Older somehow. That made no sense, and yet a strange memory surfaced. 3 weeks before Arthur died from complications following heart surgery, he had stood in our study holding a red folder and told me, Evie, there are some things I arranged so you won't have to understand them until you need them. I had laughed and told him he sounded mysterious. He had not laughed back. Now Rebecca's expression changed. She leaned closer to the page. Evelyn, she said quietly, don't say another word about that mark. Daniel finally looked up. Melissa's face lost its composure for the first time. Rebecca closed the conference room door, returned to the table, and lowered her voice. Arthur told me that if A.W-17 ever appeared after his death, I was to assume someone had opened a door he intended to keep locked. Rebecca kept her hand on the closed door as if someone might try to enter, although the hallway outside had gone quiet. Arthur gave me one instruction about that code, she said. If it appeared on a document created after his death, I was supposed to verify the document before discussing anything else. Melissa gave a thin laugh. That sounds dramatic. Rebecca did not look at her. Arthur was a careful man. Daniel shifted in his chair, and I noticed the color had drained from his face. I wanted to ask him why, but something in me said to wait. Rebecca carried the assignment to a copier in the corner and made 2 duplicates. Then she placed the original inside a clear evidence sleeve from her filing cabinet. Watching her handle it that way made my stomach tighten. Until that moment, part of me had still believed this might be some terrible misunderstanding. Melissa opened her leather portfolio. I brought the emails, she said. There were 4 messages printed from my account, each written in the calm, practical style I usually used with family. One said I wanted Daniel to take control because managing Arthur's estate had become too much for me. Another asked Melissa to prepare the necessary paperwork. I read them twice. The sentences sounded almost like me. Almost. Daniel finally spoke. Mom, you sent those. I looked at him. Did I? He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. That hesitation followed me all the way home. My house sat 9 miles north of downtown. A gray colonial Arthur and I had bought when Daniel was 6. That evening, every room seemed too large. I made tea, carried it into Arthur's study, and opened the desk drawer where he had kept his labeled folders. Blue for taxes, green for insurance, red for anything he called important. The red folder was gone. I searched the cabinet twice. Nothing. Then the old landline on Arthur's desk rang once. Just once. I froze. We had disconnected that number almost 3 months earlier. I stared at the phone until the silence became unbearable. When I lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone. Only a faint click, then nothing. I told myself old wiring did strange things. Houses settled. Circuits failed. Grief made ordinary noises feel personal. Still, I did not put the receiver down immediately. On Arthur's blotter lay his yellow legal pad. I had left it untouched since his funeral. Near the bottom of the last page was a sentence in his handwriting that I did not remember seeing before. If they make Evelyn doubt herself, check the dates first. My hands went cold. The next morning, Rebecca called before 8. She had reviewed the email records Melissa provided. One message, supposedly sent by me at 2:14 p.m. on January 16th, had been transmitted while I was aboard Flight 2187 from Chicago to Hartford. I remembered that flight because the Wi-Fi had been unavailable the entire trip. Rebecca paused before adding, "Evelyn, there's something else." The account log shows that email was sent from an IP address registered less than 2 miles from Daniel's house. For several seconds, I could hear nothing but the faint hum of Rebecca's office line and the ticking clock above Arthur's desk. 2 miles from Daniel's house. I repeated the words in my mind until they stopped sounding like a coincidence. Could Melissa have sent it? I asked. Rebecca chose her answer carefully. Someone with access to your account did. That afternoon, she introduced me to Mark Ellison, a forensic document examiner from New Haven who had spent 23 years analyzing disputed signatures. He studied the assignment beneath a magnifying lamp, then asked me to sign my name 20 times on blank paper. I felt foolish at first, like a schoolgirl being tested on handwriting, but his expression never changed. After nearly an hour, he pointed to the capital E in my real signatures. You begin this stroke from the bottom. Then he pointed to the disputed document. This one begins at the top. My mouth went dry. Mark would not call it a forgery yet. He said the signature could have been traced, digitally reproduced, or copied by someone practicing from an authentic sample. Rebecca asked where such a sample might have come from. I immediately remembered the healthcare authorization I had signed during Arthur's hospital stay. Melissa had helped organize those papers. Daniel had been there too. Before I could say it, Mark turned the assignment sideways beneath the light. There's another issue. Tiny indentations ran across the paper beneath my signature, impressions from writing done on a sheet that had once rested above it. He could make out only fragments. My name, the word transfer, and 3 characters pressed faintly into the page, 17. That night, I returned to Arthur's study determined to find the missing red folder. I checked every drawer, every shelf, even the cabinet behind his old golf trophies. At 11:06 p.m., the disconnected landline rang again. This time it rang 3 times. I did not answer. Instead, I watched it while a strange cold draft moved across the room, though every window was locked. Then Arthur's desk lamp flickered once, twice, and went dark. When it came back on, one of his books had fallen from the shelf behind me. It was his battered copy of the Federal Estate and Gift Tax Reports, a book no one but Arthur would willingly open for pleasure. A folded receipt protruded from the pages. On the back, in his handwriting, were 2 words, File 17. Beneath them was an address in Stamford belonging to a private record storage company called Fairmont Archive Services. Rebecca and I drove there the next morning. The manager, Laura McKenna, searched Arthur's name and frowned. Mr. Whitmore moved his account into restricted legacy storage 5 months ago. After that, no one could access the box unless he had named them in advance. My heart sank. Then she looked more closely at the screen. He named one person. Security records showed that person entering the archive 2 days after Arthur's funeral. Laura turned her monitor toward us. The name on the access log was Daniel Whitmore. I stared at it until Rebecca touched my arm. Daniel had told me he had spent that entire day at home with Melissa. Worse, the record showed he removed one sealed envelope and never returned it. When I called him, he answered on the second ring. I asked only one question. What did you take from your father's file? Daniel was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, Mom, I can explain the envelope. What I can't explain is why Dad wrote your name on the front of it and told me never to let Melissa see what was inside. Daniel asked me to meet him alone at a diner off Route 1, halfway between Stanford and our house. I arrived early and chose a booth where I could see the parking lot. 10 minutes later, he walked in carrying a small brown envelope under his coat. He looked older than he had 3 days earlier. I lied to you, he said before he even sat down. The words hurt more because he did not try to soften them. Daniel told me Arthur had called him into the study 12 days before his final hospital stay. My husband had been tired, but completely clear-headed. He gave Daniel a key to the Fairmont archive box and one instruction. 2 days after the funeral, remove the envelope marked with my name and hide it somewhere Melissa could not reach. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Daniel stared at the table. Because Dad also told me why. He looked at me for a moment, then added, and the red folder you've been looking for wasn't taken by Melissa. Dad gave it to me before he went back to the hospital. He had already moved the important papers out of it. He told me to keep the empty folder away from the house so no one would know where file 17 had gone. Until that moment, I had treated the missing folder as another sign that someone had been through Arthur's study. Now I understood that its disappearance had been part of his plan. He slid the envelope toward me. Inside were photocopies of 4 documents carrying versions of my signature. One was from nearly 8 months earlier. Another was a draft authorization transferring voting rights in Whitmore packaging. None had ever been filed. Mark Ellison later confirmed what Arthur had apparently already suspected. Someone had been practicing my signature long before he died. My first thought was Melissa. Then Daniel said, I knew she was asking too many questions about the trust. I just kept telling myself she was trying to help. His voice cracked on the last word. For the first time, I understood that the secret he had been carrying was not proof that he had betrayed me from the beginning. It was proof that he had been afraid to admit what he had seen. At the bottom of the envelope was one sheet in Arthur's handwriting. The first line made my chest tighten. If Evelyn sees this, then the decoy was used. Decoy. Rebecca read the page twice when we brought it to her office. Arthur had deliberately left certain draft documents where they could be found. Some contained harmless errors. Others carried the code A.W-17. He had wanted to know whether someone inside the family was copying his estate paperwork. That changed everything. The strange marks were not warnings from nowhere. Arthur had planted them while he was alive. But the landline still bothered me. That evening, I checked the old phone account online. The service had indeed been disconnected. Yet the call log showed 2 incoming calls on the exact nights I had heard the ringing. Both originated from a number Arthur once used for his private office line at Whitmore Packaging. That line had also been inactive for months. I printed the record and drove straight to Rebecca's house. She went pale when she saw the number. Arthur used that line only for trust matters, she said. Then she turned over his handwritten page and held it beneath a lamp. Faint impressions appeared from whatever he had written on the sheet above it. Rebecca traced the words slowly with her finger. The real safeguard is not in my office. Rebecca knows where to look. She stared at me, then whispered, Evelyn, I think Arthur left something with the bank that even I was never supposed to open unless the decoy was used. Rebecca called Hartford Commonwealth Bank before sunrise. By 9:30, we were sitting inside a private conference room with Claire Bennett, the senior trust officer who had handled Arthur's accounts for nearly 18 years. Claire placed a sealed gray packet on the table. My name was written across the front in Arthur's handwriting. So was one line beneath it. Open only if A.W-17 is activated. My pulse hammered. Daniel sat beside me. Melissa was not invited. Rebecca broke the seal. Inside was an amended trust agreement dated 7 months before Arthur died, along with a notarized memorandum explaining exactly why he had created it. Rebecca began reading, then stopped. Evelyn, she said, the assignment Melissa showed us could never have transferred your inheritance. I stared at her. Why not? Claire answered. Because you never personally owned those company shares in a form you could simply sign away. Arthur had moved my interest in Whitmore Packaging into a protected marital trust. I controlled the voting rights. I received the income. But any transfer of the underlying shares required approval from the bank, Rebecca, and an independent trustee. 3 separate confirmations. Melissa had none. The document on Rebecca's conference table had looked devastating because it was supposed to. But legally, it was worthless. Daniel covered his face with both hands. I felt relief for half a second. Then Rebecca kept reading. Arthur had known someone was studying our estate records. He suspected drafts had been copied from his office. So he created several decoy documents with deliberate flaws. One of them carried the code A.W-17. The same language appeared in the forged assignment Melissa claimed I had signed. She had not copied a valid transfer form. She had copied the bait Arthur left behind. Every strange detail suddenly aligned. The false emails. The practice signature. Daniel retrieving the envelope. Arthur's note telling me to check the dates. Even the words he had spoken in our study about arrangements I would understand only when I needed them. But one thing still did not fit. The phone. I showed Claire the call records from Arthur's disconnected office line. She stared at the number for several seconds. That line was routed through an old security system, she said. Arthur programmed certain alerts before he became ill. Rebecca looked at her sharply. Claire pulled up an archived service file. Arthur had programmed 2 automatic alerts months earlier. They were not scheduled for specific dates. Each one was triggered only if someone attempted to open a protected trust record without authorization. The dates matched exactly. The first alert had caused the call on the night I found Arthur's note. The second had come when someone tried again. Then Claire opened the access log attached to those alerts. Both requests had been submitted under Melissa Whitmore's name and the same email address she had used when sending estate documents to Rebecca. For the first time, we were no longer guessing who had been searching. Melissa had been looking for the real trust. She had never found it. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt Arthur's presence in every precaution, every code, every quiet layer he had placed between me and disaster. Then Claire turned to the final page. Her expression changed. "There's one more provision," she said. Daniel looked up. Rebecca read it silently first, and all the color left her face. I asked what it said. She folded her hands over the document. "Arthur didn't only protect your inheritance, Evelyn. He left you the sole authority to decide what happens to Daniel if he knowingly helped Melissa use the decoy. Then I need the truth from Daniel before I make that decision." My son looked at me across the conference table, and for once Melissa was not there to answer for him. Daniel admitted he had known she was searching Arthur's files. He had even given her the old office key once, telling himself she only wanted to understand the estate. But he swore he had never known she was practicing my signature or creating false emails. Then he reached into his coat and placed one final document beside Arthur's trust amendment. It was a paper I had never seen before, one he admitted he had kept hidden because he was ashamed of how carelessly he had signed it. Melissa had asked him to sign it months earlier. It authorized her to organize draft corporate records on his behalf. Daniel had signed without reading the attachments. One attachment contained the language later copied into my forged assignment. "I helped open the door," he said quietly. "I just didn't know what she planned to carry through it." Rebecca confirmed what that meant. Daniel had been reckless, dishonest with me afterward. But the evidence did not show that he knowingly participated in the forgery. Arthur's final provision gave me the power to remove Daniel permanently from Whitmore Packaging or place his future under independent supervision. I chose supervision, not because he deserved an easy escape. He did not. I chose it because Arthur had protected me from making decisions under pressure, and I would not let anger become another kind of pressure. Daniel lost executive control. An outside president would run the company. Any trust distribution beyond the standard terms required independent approval. Melissa was barred from representing me, accessing company records, or participating in trust matters. Rebecca also referred the forged documents for formal investigation. When Melissa finally called me, she said, "You're destroying this family over paperwork." I surprised myself by answering calmly, "No, Melissa. The paperwork only showed me what was already broken." Then I hung up. That evening, I drove the 9 miles home alone. The house was quiet when I entered Arthur's study. I disconnected the old landline from the wall completely. The ringing no longer frightened me. Claire had shown me exactly how Arthur's security alerts could make those calls. There had been no impossible voice on the other end. Just a system Arthur had prepared months earlier, waiting quietly for someone to touch the records he had protected. I opened file 17 one last time. Behind the copies and trust notes was a narrow envelope I had somehow missed. Inside was a card in Arthur's handwriting. I knew immediately it was the final piece because he had written my childhood nickname across the top. Evie. The note was short. He explained that 8.W-17 was never simply a trap for whoever copied his papers. It was a signal meant for me. If I ever saw that code somewhere it did not belong, I was to stop signing, stop apologizing, and start asking questions. At the bottom he had written, "You trust the people you love." I never wanted grief to teach you that trust was foolish. I only wanted you to remember that love does not require surrender. I sat in his chair until the room grew dark. Then the desk lamp flickered once. I knew old wiring could do that. I knew the phone calls had an explanation, and I told myself the cold drafts, the fallen book, and the flickering light probably did too. Still, I smiled toward the empty chair beside me and said, "I finally understood Arthur." And for the first time since he died, the silence in our house did not feel like something had been taken from me. It felt like something had been returned.